Her daughter whispered, "She's not even family anymore," at her own bridal shower. Sarah Whitmore, widow of Caleb Whitmore and stepmother for over 20 years, didn't look away. Emily, the bride-to-be she'd helped raise, thought the insult would fade into the noise. By morning, the trust Caleb left and Emily's claim to it would be under Sarah's control alone. She'd been both mother and protector. Now she was the executor of the family's legacy. And when Emily came for what she thought was hers, her father's letter would decide her fate. "I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates." The air was warm with the scent of vanilla cupcakes and something floral, lavender maybe, wafting from the centerpieces. The air went still when she said, "You're not even real family anymore." I stood just inside the doorway, clutching the gift I'd wrapped in soft gold paper. My heels felt too high, my dress suddenly too plain among the glittering chiffon and pastel satins moving through the room. Emily spotted me from across the buffet table. Her smile, the one I used to think could light up a room, flickered on and off in a second. She reached for a stack of paper plates, handed me one without breaking eye contact with the woman beside her. The edges of the plate bent slightly under my fingers. "Help yourself," she said, her voice bright but hollow, like a store clerk rehearsing a greeting. I stepped aside, letting the next person pass, and found a spot near the fruit tray. That's when it happened. Emily leaned toward her cousin, voice dropping just enough that it wasn't meant for me, yet close enough that it couldn't have been accidental. "She's not even real family anymore." It landed in my chest like something heavy and sharp at the same time, my forecover. Ed over the melon cubes, suddenly ridiculous in its weight. I kept my head down, jaw fixed, as if concentrating on choosing fruit, but the words burned through the soft chatter and clinking glasses around us. This wasn't the first time she'd been cool to me, not by a long shot, but this felt permanent. Not a bad mood, not stress. A verdict. I straightened, forcing a polite smile at the woman across from me, though my throat felt tight. The urge to say something, anything, flickered and died under the watchful eyes of guests who had no idea what had just been said. Lucas was near the drinks table, talking to one of Emily's friends. I caught his eye for a fraction of a second, but he looked away, too quickly, as if the condensation on his soda can had suddenly become fascinating. My own son choosing silence. The rest of the afternoon blurred into a loop of polite laughter and safe topics. I commented on the weather, the hors d'oeuvres, the floral arrangements, anything but the iceberg that had just cracked the floor beneath us. Emily moved through the room like a hostess from a magazine spread, every hug and laugh perfectly timed, never lingering near me for more than a few seconds. When the last gift was opened and the guests began drifting toward the door, I slipped out quietly, my hands trembling just enough to make finding my car keys a small battle. In the driver's seat, the silence hit harder than the music inside had. I stared at the steering wheel, the imprint of her words still pressing on my chest. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the finality. I reached for my phone and typed with fingers that weren't quite steady. "I can't do this anymore." Karen's name glowed on the screen as the message sent. The parking lot shimmered under the late afternoon sun, but I barely saw it. My hands stayed in my lap, my body heavy against the seat. The phone buzzed once. Her reply was short, unhesitating, and left no room for the limbo I'd been living in. "You need to confront her before it's too late." I spent the next few days in silence, while the coldness between hut. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothes. It was the kind that hangs in corners, follows you from room to room, and makes the hum of the refrigerator sound like a clock ticking down. I didn't text her. I didn't call. The phone stayed face down on the kitchen counter like it might bite me. Every time I walked past it, I felt that tight pull in my chest, the echo of her voice at the bridal shower, thin and sharp. She's not even real family anymore. On the third day, Lucas called. His tone was casual, like nothing had happened. He mentioned the new flowers for the wedding, the way the catering deposit had just cleared, the song list Emily was finalizing for the reception. His words skated over the ice between us, never looking down. I almost told him, almost asked if he'd heard her, if he'd heard all of it. But something in his voice warned me. Maybe it was loyalty to her, maybe it was fear. I let him finish talking and hung up with a hollow, "Thanks for calling." Nights were worse. I'd lie in bed replaying it, changing the way I might have responded, rewriting the script in my head. In one version, I laughed it off. In another, I called her out in front of everyone. In the version that kept me awake the longest, I simply left before she could finish the sentence. By Friday, Karen had had enough of my quiet. She showed up with her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot, a grocery bag hooked over her arm. She made tea without asking, leaning on the counter as the kettle hissed. "You're letting her write this story," she said. "You need to write your own." "I can't," I murmured. "She's my daughter." "Then be her mother," Karen shot back, setting the mug in front of me. "And a mother doesn't let her child walk all over her dignity." I looked away. Love can make you blind, but it can also make you deaf to every warning, every truth you don't want to hear. The male C. Came late that afternoon. A thin stack of envelopes slid through the slot and onto the rug by the door. On top was an ivory card with raised lettering, my name printed in looping script. I opened it at the counter. The wedding invitation was all blush and cream, embossed with roses. Emily's name filled the center in gold foil. There was no mention of me, no, together with their families, no acknowledgement that I even existed in the equation. My fingers tightened on the card until the paper creaked. By evening, I was pacing the living room. The invitation lay on the coffee table like a dare. I picked up my phone and called Karen. "I can't do this anymore." Her voice was steady. "Then do something about it. You have the power." The line went quiet for a beat, just our breathing. I hung up and went to the hall closet, kneeling on the hardwood until my knees ached. Behind the winter boots and the box of Christmas lights, there was a weathered cedar box I hadn't opened in years. It smelled faintly of cedar and time when I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, Lucas as a boy, Emily with her first bicycle, cards from anniversaries, Caleb's watch wrapped in tissue, and beneath it all, a cream envelope with my name in his handwriting. The paper was heavier than I remembered, the kind that carries weight even before you read the words. My late husband's seal was still unbroken. I sat back on my heels, the letter balanced in my hands, my pulse loud in my ears. I had forgotten I even kept it. The room seemed to still, the shadows lengthening around me as I slid a finger under the flap. The seal gave way with a soft crack. I didn't read it yet, just held it, feeling the edges, the decades in between. Somewhere in those pages were instructions he'd left for me, words I never thought I'd need, but now they might be the only thing standing between me and the erasu, race my daughter had already begun. The letter was a reminder of the past and a hint of what could come. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, the cedar scent from the box still lingering faintly in the air. The flap was open now, but I hadn't yet dared to pull the letter free. My fingers rested on the edge, feeling the thickness of the paper as though the weight of Caleb's hands still pressed it there. When I finally slid it out, the pages unfolded with a whisper, like they'd been holding their breath all these years. His handwriting, strong, deliberate, pulled me back instantly. I could hear his voice in each loop and line, could see him bent over the desk in his study, that little furrow between his brows he got when something mattered. "Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to have these words in case the years after me are not as kind as I hoped they'd be." I blinked hard, my thumb smoothing the crease in the paper. He spoke of the family, how he'd worked to build not just security, but something that would outlast him. He mentioned Lucas, his steady nature. He mentioned Emily by name, not as an outsider, not as a guest. "She's to be treated as a daughter," he wrote, "and in return, she must treat you as family, always." The phrasing tightened something in my chest. Even in his absence, he'd left space for respect to go both ways. Then came the part I'd never known about. In the trust, I have included Emily as a potential beneficiary, but only if she honors you in word and in deed. Should she fail to do so, the distribution is at your sole discretion. This is not punishment. It is protection for you and for the legacy we built together. I read that sentence 3 times, my pulse loud in my ears. My hands trembled, not with greed, but with the sudden knowledge that this wasn't just about my feelings anymore. It was about something far larger, a thread of history and intention that reached back to Caleb and forward to everything we'd worked for. It wasn't money I cared about. It was the fact that he'd seen this possibility, that he'd prepared for it, that he'd trusted me to act. I set the letter down gently, as though it might shatter. The quiet of the kitchen felt different now, less like a wait, more like a pause before a step forward. The temptation to call Emily then and there was sharp. But no, this couldn't be emotional. It had to be precise, measured. I needed to choose my moment, and I needed to walk into it with more than hurt feelings. I made a list that night, documents to review, phrases in the trust to highlight, the exact language of that clause Caleb had tucked away like a locked door only I could open. By the time the clock struck midnight, my plan was clear enough to settle the thudding in my chest. I didn't want to fight for the sake of fighting. I wanted recognition, respect. And if she wouldn't give it freely, then she'd have to face the terms her own name was tied to. I picked up my phone, hesitating over Lucas's contact. My thumb hovered for a beat before I typed, "I need to speak to Emily about something important." The message sent. The little delivered note blinked beneath it. I left the phone on the counter and went to rinse my cup, the steady splash of water in the sink louder than it should have been. When the reply came, the screen lit the dim kitchen like a match in the dark. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mom." The air in the room shifted when I said, "I have something to say to you, Emily." I'd chosen the dining room deliberately. Wide table, good light, nowhere to hide behind casual furniture. The trust letter sat in its envelope at the center, the paper weighted with Caleb's old brass letter opener. When the knock came, I didn't move right away. Let her wait a second. Let her know this wasn't a visit for tea. Emily stepped inside without meeting my eyes. Her phone in hand, thumbs busy. She wore a fitted blazer and a look that belonged more in a boardroom than her mother's house. "I don't have long," she said, brushing past me toward the table. I stayed standing. "Sit." She glanced up at that, half amusement, half irritation, but she sat. I took my chair opposite her, slid the envelope into the center space between us. "I have something to say to you, Emily." That was when her phone hit the table, her head tilting in mock curiosity. This sounds serious. I opened the envelope, drew the letter out carefully, flattening the folds with my palm. My voice stayed steady. "You're not even family anymore? I'd like to see if that's true." Her laugh was short, practiced. "Oh God, are we really doing this? You're taking things way too personally." I began to read. Caleb's words filled the space between us, each one more deliberate than the last. She started with a smirk, leaning back in her chair, tapping one manicured finger against the wood. But when I reached the clause, the one about her treatment of me being a condition for her inclusion in the trust, her body shifted forward a fraction. The smirk loosened. I kept reading. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every syllable carried the weight of a man she'd once called family and could no longer charm. When I finished, I folded the letter, set it gently back on the table. "I've waited a long time to see if you could live up to this." Emily's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me. "So what? You think you can just wave that around like a magic wand? You don't even—" "Emily." I cut her off without volume, just precision. "I have the legal right to decide, to distribute the trust as I see fit. If you meet the terms, you're in. If you don't, you're out." That hit. Her gaze narrowed, her hands clasped tight in her lap now. She tried for a laugh, but it caught. Hit halfway. Brittle. You'd never—" "You've been betting on that," I said, leaning forward just enough to close the space she'd kept between us. "Betting that I'd choose silence over confrontation, that I'd rather keep the peace than keep my dignity. But I'm done. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint tick of the old wall clock. She stared at me like she was recalculating something. Risk, reward, the number of people she thought would take her side. Finally, she pushed her chair back so suddenly it scraped the floor. She stood, palms flat on the table. "You can't do this." She tried to tear it apart, but the truth held steady. Emily didn't slam the door when she left. She yanked it so hard the frame rattled. The sound echoed through the house, vibrating in my ribs long after she was gone. I stayed seated at the table, my fingers still resting on the folded letter. It felt almost warm from where my palm had pressed it flat. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word now, and I knew exactly what she was going to do next. By the following afternoon, Karen called. "She's talking," she said without preamble. "Not just talking, telling people you're holding the trust hostage, making it sound like you've gone power mad." I closed my eyes. Of course she is. It didn't take long to confirm. At the grocery store, Mrs. Colton from 2 streets over leaned toward me in the cereal aisle and said, "I'm so sorry you're having trouble with Emily." Her tone carried the careful sympathy of someone who'd only heard one side. I went home with milk, bread, and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untangle. Karen came over that evening, legal pad in hand. "If she's going to make this public, you need to be ready to make it legal." We spread the documents across my dining table. Caleb's original trust, the amendments, the letter, Karen's neat handwriting files. I laid page after page as I dictated dates, events, and the ways Emily's treatment of me had been less family and more calculated erosion. By the end of the night, my resolve felt less like a raw nerve. A week later, Lucas stopped by. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "I've been hearing things," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, "from Emily, but I've also been remembering things." I let him in, poured coffee, waited. He took a long breath. "The way she talks to you, it's not right. I used to tell myself you two just didn't click. But it's more than that. I've seen her push you aside in front of people. I've seen her—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything before." The apology didn't fix everything, but it slotted a missing piece into place. I wasn't imagining this. Karen and I made an appointment with a family estate lawyer downtown. Her office smelled faintly of leather and eucalyptus, the shelves lined with thick binders labeled in gold foil. She listened without interrupting, eyes scanning the trust documents as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back. "Your position is strong. The clause is clear. If she challenges you, we can defend it." It was the first breath I'd taken in days that didn't catch in my throat. I went home that night and began drafting a personal statement, not for court, but for myself. Every line was a boundary, a reminder that this wasn't about punishing Emily. It was about not allowing her to erase me from my own family's story. 3 days later, the phone rang. The lawyer's number lit up the screen. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it I didn't like. "Sarah, I've been going through the fine print of the trust, and there's something you need to see. There may be a potential loophole, one Emily's lawyer could use if they find it before we address it." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of loophole?" A pause. "The kind that could change everything." The lies Emily wove had to be confronted, and I was ready. The lawyer's warning sat in my mind and like a grain of sand, small but sharp enough to keep me awake. If Emily's attorney found that loophole first, everything I'd been holding together could unravel in her favor. The next morning, I opened the cedar box again. The letter lay on top, but I pushed it aside and pulled out the folders beneath. Bank statements, charity board minutes, emails Caleb had printed and saved. I wasn't looking for sentiment now. I was looking for proof. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Emily's name threaded through decision after decision, and mine was conspicuously absent. Fund allocations approved without my signature. A gala committee vote recorded as unanimous when I hadn't even been invited. Then, tucked between two board reports, a spreadsheet of the memorial fund Caleb had started after he died. The column for administrative fees was twice what I remembered.